The smell of reheated coffee and fried grease filled the air at Rosy's diner, mingling with the light scent of cinnamon from the waffles that Lily Harper was hurriedly preparing. It was a cold, rainy night in New York, and as always, the small restaurant was packed with hasty customers, exhausted workers, and a few familiar faces who showed up daily for the cheap dinner and welcoming service. Lily, despite the long hours and the fatigue weighing on her shoulders, smiled at each one of them. Her uniform was a bit worn, her shoes ached, but her eyes still shone with that rare kindness that made anyone feel seen. To her, each customer was more than just a noted order. They were stories, lives that, in some way, intersected with hers in that small, forgotten corner of the city. That night, however, something different happened. When Lily finally left the restaurant after her shift, carrying a bag with the day's leftovers that she would take to the homeless, the rain pounded the concrete. Sidewalks like a heavy, unbroken curtain. The biting cold made the street seem even emptier and more desolate. It was then that, as she passed by a poorly lit bus stop, she spotted a boy huddled on one of the metal benches, his knees drawn up to his chest. His clothes soaked and trembling, his face was partially hidden by the torn hood of a dirty sweatshirt. But the eyes that met hers as she approached were far too large for a child his age, full of a silent fear, mixed with the exhaustion of someone who had learned not to expect anything from the world. Lily knelt before the boy, ignoring the cold seeping into her own bones. "Hey, are you okay?" Her voice was soft and unhurried, as if she knew that the trust of someone hurt is not earned with rushed questions. The boy did not answer immediately. He only averted his gaze, drawing his knees even closer to his chest. She tried again. "Are you alone?" This time, he nodded slightly without looking at her. Lily's heart tightened. Children shouldn't be alone, especially not in that city on that night. Without thinking too much, she opened her bag and took out a sandwich, extending it to him. "Here, it's fresh." The boy hesitated, his hungry eyes fixed on the bread, delaying his grasp. Lily recognized that hesitation. It was the kind of hunger that couldn't afford to be impulsive. It was the kind of hunger that already knew that favors always came at a price. She didn't insist. Instead, she sat down beside him, as if the storm were not soaking her hair and freezing her skin. "My name is Lily, and yours?" He delayed his response, as if even his own name were a luxury not worth sharing. "Danny," he replied. The word came out weak, but firm enough for her to sense that there was still something there, a strength that hadn't been completely extinguished. Lily smiled, as if that simple name were a gift. "Nice to meet you, Danny." For a while they stayed there, listening to the rain, the comfortable silence between them more powerful than any word she could utter. When the boy finally took the sandwich and began eating in small, cautious bites, Lily knew he was beginning to trust her, and that, for someone like Danny, was far more valuable than any immediate response. When Danny finished eating, Lily stood up and extended her hand to him without forcing anything. "Come with me. I'll get you a warm place to dry these clothes and have something else to eat." The boy hesitated. His gaze flitted between her face and the wet streets, as if weighing options no child should ever have to consider. But in the end, hunger overcame fear. He grasped Lily's hand with his small, cold fingers, and the two walked together through the rain to Rosy's diner. The restaurant was already closed, but Lily knew where the spare key was hidden. As soon as they entered, the warmth of the place made Danny shudder, as if his body was only now realizing how cold it had been. Lily grabbed an old blanket she used on winter nights and draped it over his shoulders, then placed a cup of hot chocolate in front of him. "Here, this will help." He held the mug with both hands, absorbing the warmth, and took a timid sip before looking at her. For the first time, it seemed he wanted to say something, but he didn't know how. Lily didn't press him. She simply sat next to him at the counter and began tidying up the cutlery she had set aside for washing earlier, giving him the space to feel in control of his own story. Gradually, Danny relaxed, his tired body yielding to the security of the moment. The silence between them was not heavy. On the contrary, it carried a kind of peace, that Lily rarely found in her hectic work nights. Then, for the first time, Danny lifted his head and looked her in the eyes. "Why?" His voice was low, almost a whisper. Lily frowned. "What?" He pressed his lips before continuing, as if the words were difficult to utter. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Lily smiled, resting her arms on the counter. "Because someone did the same for me one day." The truth was simpler than he imagined. More than an act of kindness, it was a cycle being renewed. Outside, the rain was already subsiding, turning into a fine drizzle that sparkled under the streetlights. The world outside carried on, indifferent to what was happening inside the small diner, but on the other side of the street, a pair of watchful eyes observed everything. James Dalton, reclining in the leather seat of his car, watched the scene unhurriedly. He wasn't the type to be swayed by sentimentality, and his whole life had been shaped by numbers, strategies, and transactions. But that night, something within him hesitated. He should have simply moved on, forgotten about that waitress and the street boy who, in the grand scheme of things, were just two more strangers in a city teeming with untold stories. But he couldn't. There was something in the way Lily moved, in the care she put into every gesture, that made him remember something long buried within him. James jotted down the name of the restaurant on a piece of paper and tucked it into the pocket of his blazer. He didn't know exactly why he was doing it. Perhaps it was mere curiosity, or maybe a desire to understand why that scene had affected him so deeply. But the truth was that upon seeing Lily act so naturally without expecting anything in return, he felt a strange discomfort, a void within him he had never noticed before. Deep down, he knew his life was full of excesses and empty achievements, but until that moment, he had never really cared. He gripped the steering wheel tightly and let out a long sigh before starting the car. That waitress had no idea that by changing the night of an unknown boy, she had just planted a seed of doubt in the mind of a man who rarely hesitated. In the following days, Lily continued her exhausting routine, unaware that on that rainy night she had left a mark on someone who would never expect it. Rosy's diner remained the same. Worn furniture, the smell of old coffee, hasty customers, but suddenly something began to stand out from that common scene. First, it was the man in an impeccable suit who entered the restaurant on an ordinary night. Sitting at one of the tables near the window, he didn't seem like the type of person who would happen upon the place by chance. Lily attended to him as she did with everyone else, with her genuine smile and the same careful attention as always. He observed every detail, the way she handled the customers, the patient manner in which she soothed a grumpy man, the way she never seemed too tired to be kind. When he finished his meal, the man paid discreetly and left an envelope on the table before leaving. Lily only discovered it later while cleaning up. When she opened it, her heart nearly stopped. Inside was an absurd sum of money, much more than any ordinary tip. For a moment she froze, trying to process it all. She looked around, but the man had already vanished. Her first instinct was to run out to the street, to try to find him and return the money. But all she found was the emptiness of the wet sidewalk. What would someone like him be doing there? And why would he leave so much money for just any waitress? In the following days, she couldn't shake it from her mind. Then, shortly afterward, he returned. And this time, he didn't leave only money. He left an invitation to change her life. This time, the man did not leave, unnoticed. He requested to be served by Lily, and during the service showed an interest that went beyond food or service. He wanted to know her. He asked about her routine, what it was like to work there, but Lily, used to curious customers, didn't pay much attention. She was far too busy balancing plates and orders to get lost in idle chatter. Before leaving, he handed her a folded note and asked that she only open it after he was gone. Lily hesitated, but as soon as she was alone, she unfolded the paper and felt her legs give way. Inside was a check for $50,000. The message was simple, yet laden with meaning. Your kindness inspired me. Use this to create the future you deserve. A grateful stranger. For days, Lily wrestled with the decision to accept that money. It made no sense. She wasn't anyone special. All she did was treat people with respect and help when she could. Yet deep down, she knew that the check represented something greater, a real opportunity to break free from that exhausting routine and build something of her own. When she finally found the courage to accept it, her life took an unexpected leap. Weeks later, while walking home, a black car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, revealing the mysterious man. "Andrew Hale," he introduced himself, and Lily finally understood who she was dealing with. He didn't just want to help her. He saw in her something rare, a spark of kindness in a cold world. And at that moment, Lily realized that her life would never be the same.